Welcome back to Women Writers in Chinese History. This video briefly introduces Buddhism and Daoism and women's relation to these traditions. At the end, we'll also look at the tradition of strange writings and its reflection of women's writing. First, Buddhism. Let's begin with a quick history about Buddhism's spread in China. Likely it was first introduced into China during the 1st century, during the Eastern Han Dynasty. Later, as we have mentioned, Buddhism grew in influence and popularity during the period of disunion, from the 4th to the 6th century. The initial spread of Buddhism depended on Central Asian immigrants into Eastern Han China and the dynasties during the period of division. A major type of activity that took place during Buddhism's spread was the translation of sutras into classical Chinese. Later, the Chinese monk Xuanzang Tripitaka conducted a pilgrimage to India during the 7th century Tang Dynasty to bring back authentic scriptures to China. This pilgrimage was the foundation of the famous novel The Journey to the West, which portrays a world of spirits, deities, and demons surrounding Xuanzang's journey. Also around the Tang Dynasty, Chan Buddhism, which fused Daoist elements, began to take place and later influenced Japanese Buddhism, that is, as Zen. All in all, Buddhism became profoundly integrated with China's native cultural traditions and came to be known as one of the three teachings, Sanjiao, along with Confucianism and Daoism. Here are some examples of Buddhist scriptures and sutras from traditional China. Just like any major religion of the world, Buddhism has many different branches and tendencies, but at the core of its teaching rests the Four Noble Truths, which some of you may already be familiar with. The first is the truth of suffering, Ku, which refers to the inevitable end of human life through the process of aging, sickness, and death. The second is the truth of the origin of suffering, Ji, which basically means human desire and attachment to worldly gains such as money, power, and even family ties and romantic passion. According to Buddhism, all desires are delusional, since they are attached to impermanent and fundamentally illusory goals. The third is the truth of the sensation of suffering, Mie, that is to overcome one's desires or to realize the illusoriness of one's desires. The fourth is the truth of the path to the sensation of suffering, Dao, that is to embark on the path of Buddhist cultivation, either in a monastery or as a lay person, for the purpose of achieving the enlightened state known as nirvana in Buddhism. The Chinese translation for nirvana is Nieppan. The human suffering in Buddhism is rooted in the eternal motion of the wheel of life, 轮回, since assumed that rebirth follows after death for all living beings. To escape from this cycle of reincarnation or transmigration, 转世, one must transcend worldly illusions and achieve nirvana. In Imperial China, the type of Buddhism that took hold was the greater vehicle or Mahayana Buddhism. Briefly speaking, Mahayana Buddhism promoted the salvation of all beings instead of oneself, so it's a greater boat, as the metaphor for enlightenment or salvation in Buddhism is that of crossing to the other shore in terms of Du. In Mahayana Buddhism, deities known as Bodhisattva or Pusa willingly delay their nirvana or ultimate enlightenment in order to stay in this world and save others. The most famous Bodhisattva in the Chinese tradition is Guanyin, Guanyin Pusa, the goddess of mercy, the Indian original of whom is Avalokitesvara. Notably, this bodhisattva, in its original Indian form, was a man with a more or less androgynous appearance, and remained so in earlier Buddhist arts in China. Yet after the Tang Dynasty, the bodhisattva gained a female appearance, and her iconic image is shown here on the right. Why did this happen? On the one hand, it was likely related to the feminine quality of compassion, the value embodied by the bodhisattva. At the same time, one theory is that China's only woman emperor Wu Zetian promoted the female image of the bodhisattva in order to assert that a woman can be a deity or obtain the highest authority like herself. Overall, Buddhism brought in notions conducive to gender equality in the context of traditional China. This first had to do with the Buddhist principle of universal salvation, especially Mahayana Buddhism, according to which not only men and women, but also animals and insects are entitled to salvation. Through reincarnation, one may also take on these different forms as man, woman, or animal in different lifetimes. There is hence a fluidity of identity across all these categories. Ultimately, the Buddhist principle of the impermanence of all worldly forms suggests that gender itself is illusory, or at least not as essential to one's being as in the ritual discourse. Furthermore, joining the Buddhist monastic order was literally called leaving the family, 出家 in traditional China, since one was going to follow a life of celibacy in pursuit of the religious goal of salvation for oneself and for others. This detachment from the family structure, as we have mentioned, could free a woman from the bond of marriage. Tongshur, which is shaving the head, is the initiation ritual when either a man or a woman joins the Buddhist monastery. It's known as Tidu in Chinese. The hair represents ties to the world, including social and political ties, as well as family ties. Since an early time, women began to join the Buddhist order as nuns, known as nigu or bhikkshuni in Chinese. There are still Buddhist nuns in China today. In the 6th century, a book of biographies of Buddhist nuns emerged, entitled Biographies of Bhikshunis, Bhikshuni Zhuan. The author was a monk of the title Bao Chang. The biographies include a few episodes related to women and religious writing, and those episodes are often of a fantastic nature, similar to Buddhist miracle tales. Now let's take a look at an excerpt from one of those accounts. This brief record is about the final moment of a Buddhist abbess. On the 5th day of the 4th month, she announced to her disciples, "Now I'll pass away." While her disciples wept, she opened her robes and showed her chest. On her chest, they saw a perfectly formed character Fu, Buddha, in cursive script. The character was radiant and white, and its color and shape were bright and rich. Zhi Sheng died at noon on the 8th day. At the time, she was 66 years old, and she was buried on Bell Mountain. Under normal circumstances, it's hard to imagine a woman revealing her chest to others. Yet here the story is presented as a religious miracle, and the abbess' gender identity does not seem to be a matter of concern here, since the focus of the narrative is on her embodiment of the Buddhist message as shown by the character Buddha or Fu on her chest. Even though the abbess did not leave behind her own writing, the story interestingly triangulates Buddhist miracle, a woman character, and the written sign. Another longer and even more fantastic story about the sutra revealed through a young girl can be found in a book titled Collected Notes on Texts from Tripitaka, which was compiled during the 5th century. As the story goes, the sutras listed above were produced by Nizi, the virgin daughter of Jiangbi, who during the final years of the Qi served as an erudite of the National Academy. Even as a toddler, Nizi would sometimes close her eyes and sit in meditation and then begin producing those sutras by reciting them. Sometimes she would say she had ascended to heaven, and other times she would say that a deity had taught them to her. When she pronounced the words, she spoke fluently and clearly, as if she knew them by heart. When they had someone transcribe her words, sometimes she would suddenly stop reciting, but then after 1 or 2 weeks continue again as before. In the capital, both monastics and lay people all talk about this miracle. When the present emperor summoned her before him and questioned her as to how she did this, she answered each of his questions in a perfectly normal way. She firmly believed in the correct Dharma and from an early age practiced Buddhism. When her parents wanted to marry her off, she vowed never to marry. Eventually, she left the household life, took the religious name of Sun Fa, and went to live in the Green Garden Convent. After I had finished collecting the orthodox books, I began to look into miraculous rumors, and when this affair came to my knowledge, I went to her house and requested to see the sutras. Her family kept them hidden and would not show them to me. However, I was only able to obtain the Sutra of the Miraculous Sound of the Lion's Roar. It's for this reason that I have listed her texts among the questionable sutras. This nun died in the 3rd month of the 4th year of heavenly supervision. When those interested in these matters obtained her texts and commentaries, it turned out the sutras she had produced one after another added up to more than 20 scrolls. Firmly convinced that these were genuine sutras, her maternal uncle, Sun Zhi, commented on them and preached them, collected them, and copied them. As they have been touched by brush and writing tablet, they are bound to be preserved. At the end of this fantastic story of revealed sutra, the author adds an aside on another case of a woman's mysterious Buddhist writing, this time in a foreign language. As the story goes, long ago, in the final years of reign period, established peace of the Han Dynasty, the wife of a man surnamed Ding from Jining suddenly came down with what appeared to be an illness, after which she found herself able to speak in a foreign tongue. She also asked for writing brush and paper, and in her own hand wrote a book in foreign script. When later some foreigners from the western regions saw this book, they declared it to be a sutra. So if we search through antiquity, we find there have been indeed these cases. Since Nizi's sutras were not uttered by the golden mouth of the Buddha, nor have they been translated by an Indian master. However, I was not sure whether to include or reject them, which is why I have appended them under the category of questionable. Of course, it's difficult to verify or to believe if these stories are true. Were they reflections of true events in which women secretly penned sutras? Or were they using female characters simply to underscore the miraculous nature of these events? None of the sutras is now extant, but the story like the one we just read represent a fantastic model of female authorship, that is to write through possession or divine inspiration. We'll see this model again in non-Buddhist stories as well. During the later dynasties, such as the Ming Dynasty, some Buddhist nuns did leave behind very interesting poems, reflecting the tenets of Chan Buddhism. In the interest of time, we'll not read them together for this class, but the related readings are posted on this Canvas page, and you're welcome to explore this topic further on your own. Now let's move to the topic of Daoism. First, let's review some basic Daoist principles, which you may have learned elsewhere. The notion at the core of Daoism is Wu Wei, non-action. While this is a complex philosophical concept, it basically means going with the flow and having no forceful actions. Another major characteristic of Daoism is its relativism. That is, all meanings are relative and limited. Hence, there is no absolute truth other than the fact that everything is constantly changing and interdependent on one another. Going along with this relativism is the principle of the complementarity of opposites. That is the yin-yang principle we have mentioned in an earlier lecture. The idea that opposites, such as day and night, or men and women, constitute the whole. Finally, Daoism promotes the power of the weak, and important metaphors for this concept include water, the infant, and a woman. According to Daoist texts such as Daoism's founding classic Dao De Jing, water is the softest of all, yet also the most powerful, as it can take on different shapes and gradually transform the landscape over time. The infant in Daoism represents the purity of nature and the youth one wishes to return to in the pursuit for immortality. The image of women in Daoism embodies the hidden power of yin, that is, all that seems to be subordinate and passive. The Daoist image of women is further associated with motherhood and birth, and hence as the roots of all beings, as reflected by this passage in Dao De Jing. The valley spirit dies not, I the same, the female mystery, this do we name. Its gate, from which at first they issue forth, is called the root from which grew heaven and earth. Long and unbroken does its power remain, used gently and without the touch of pain. Given women's relatively higher position in Daoism, there are a number of female deities associated with Daoism, such as the mythical Queen Mother of the West, Xi Wangmu, who in some earlier accounts has the face of a tiger and has been portrayed as the matriarch of the Western domain of immortals. The goddess Nuwa we have introduced earlier was also often worshipped as a Daoist deity. Also of note is the case of Wei Huacun from the Jin dynasty around the 4th century. She was married with 2 children, but she was always dedicated to the way of Daoism and spent the latter part of her life in retirement to focus on Daoist cultivation. Supposedly, in this retired state, she met many immortals who revealed scriptures to her. Now, the Daoist scripture Huang Ting Jing is attributed to Wei Huacun, and she has been worshipped as a Daoist deity. There are other interesting cases of women and Daoism, such as a Tang princess with the title Yu Zhen, who possibly wrote a Daoist meditation text on the magic of flying under the title Ling Fei Jing. And Red Brush includes a miracle story on a peasant girl named Wang Fajin from the late 10th century who obtained the way and soared up in the sky to become an immortal. Finally, it's worth mentioning that, similar to Buddhism, a woman can join a Daoist monastery and become a Daoist nun. Some women still choose to do that today. Like Buddhism, Daoism in the traditional context provided women with another ideological framework wherein they might imagine for themselves a greater freedom and a different identity, away from the bond of a married life and all the duties and restrictions coming with marriage and family ties. Next, let's look at a case of a woman writing through the pretext of spiritual possession, as reported in a type of traditional writing known as strange stories, 志怪. First, the so-called strange stories, 志怪, is a type of short narrative account written in classical Chinese, often on supernatural or remarkable events. They were typically compiled for entertainment purpose to satisfy the curiosity of their readers. Strange stories were quite popular during the period of division, as scholars became interested in mystical subjects. This interest in strange events diverged from the orthodox Confucian teaching, which advises that one should not be concerned with supernatural events. According to a famous quote from the Analects, the master would not speak of disorders, prodigious feasts, strange phenomena, or spirits. 子不语乱厉怪神. This quote indicates the marginal position of strange stories in the cultural tradition, yet it's precisely this unorthodox nature of the stories that render them interesting and even fascinating in the eyes of many traditional readers. Later, the tradition of strange stories in Chinese literature would continue through the transmitted marvels, 传奇 stories of the Tang Dynasty, which are slightly longer fictional narratives, and Pu Songling's 聊斋志异, strange stories from a Chinese studio from the 17th century, a collection of over 500 strange stories, often focusing on the beautiful and benevolent image of female fox spirits or ghosts. Now, let's look at a strange story about a young woman claiming to have been possessed by a male spirit and using this identity to mingle with other male poets. This story is collected in an 8th century collection titled Guanyin, extensive collection of miracles, and the young woman's name is Wang Fajin, whereas her male alter ego's name is Teng Chuanyin. As the story goes, Wang Fajin, a girl from Tonglu, from the time she was very young, venerated a deity with the appearance of a young man. Sometimes during the rain period, great continuation, this deity was suddenly heard to speak through her mouth with the voice of an adult. Fajin's father questioned him, asking, "Are yours the words of a divinity?" The answer was, "Indeed they are. My name is Teng Chuanyin. I was a native of Guanyin district in the capital and lived in the Chongxian ward. I have a karmic affinity with Fajin. If you conversed with him, he displayed a thorough understanding of principle, and the successive prefects and magistrates all regarded him very highly." The district magistrate of Tonglu, Zheng Feng, was a man of great curiosity and repeatedly summoned Fajin to his quarters. When he commanded her to invoke the spirit of Teng Chuanyin, it'd be quite a while before he arrived. His eloquent repartee was a sign of his gentlemanly style, and Feng never tired of listening to him. Whenever Teng met with poets, he would discuss the classics and recite poetry, happily conversing the whole day long. Once, when a traveling monk stopped by Fajin's place asking for alms, the deity engaged him in conversation and presented him with a poem that read, "So independent, without striving, famed among the monks, holding fast to your goal, you roam beyond the clouds. The heroes of today shake the heavens with their vigor, but which of them will sit for eternity on the lotus throne? 着力不求名出家，常怀片志在青霞。今日英雄气冲盖，谁能久坐宝莲花?" On another occasion, he presented another person with the following poem. "During my lifetime, my talents fell short. As for my character, I was true to my word. I never did give anyone cause for blame, so no gentleman need keep his distance. 平生才不足，立身信有余。自叹无大故， 君子莫相疏. On the night of the 25th day of the second month of the 6th year, I, Dai Fu, found myself at the residence of Zheng Feng, together with Xu Huang of the military service section of the left guard, the magistrate of Longquan, Cui Xiang, the assistant magistrate of Danyang, Li Congxun, and 2 local men, Han Wei and Su Xiu. Then Fajin also came and was ordered to call down the spirit of Teng Chuanyin. It was a long time before he arrived. After he had exchanged 100 or so words with Xu Huang and the others, he said, "Gentlemen, why don't each of you recite a poem?" After each of us had recited the poem, we all asked him for a poem. Without any hesitation, he recited 2 poems, the first of which went, "When the flood rises at the mouth of the river, the waters swell, and the lotus boats rock and sway, making it hard to pick the flowers. Your spring heart left unsatisfied, you return with nothing to show. When the flood has subsided, you may try again to pick them. 浦口潮来出渺漫，连舟摇扬采花难。春心不切空归去，会待潮平更折看." He added, "Please do not laugh at me." The second poem went, "Out of the blue, a single cloud drifts across the lake, and suddenly rain soaks your clothes in the boat. You forget all about the lotus flowers you might have picked, and go home, covering your head in vain with lotus leaves. 忽然湖上片云飞，不觉舟中雨湿衣。折得莲花魂忘却，空将荷叶盖头归." He himself commented, "This poem is also rather lame." Then he departed, after having ordered his younger brother Fazhi to exchange some hundreds of words with Zheng Feng. All in all, here we witness a story in which a woman assumed a male identity to crash into a male literary party. As we see on these portraits, under normal circumstances, these literary gatherings were exclusive to men, while women could best serve in the role of maids. In the words of the authors of Red Brush, because of the male spirit who spoke through her, Wang Fazhi was able to participate in male society and exchange poems with elite men, something that would have been out of the question for an elite woman who valued her reputation. Wang Fazhi's alternate personality, Teng Chuanyin, was a welcome guest at the get-togethers of the local elite of Tonglu. The authors also offer an excellent reading of the multiple evocations of the image of the lotus flower in Wang Fazhi or Teng Chuanyin's poems. In their words, his popularity may have been partly due to the subtle erotic nature of some of his poems. In the poem translated above, for example, the lotus has 2 possible meanings. In Buddhism, it's a symbol for spiritual purity, maintained even in the sinful mire of the worldly life. The lotus throne refers to the throne of the Buddha, and devout believers reborn in the pure land of the west of the Buddha, Amitabha, are each given a lotus upon which to sit. On the other hand, the Chinese word for lotus, lian, is also a homonym for another word that means love, lian. Thus, the image of young girls, often compared to lotus flowers in their little boats, floating among a jungle of lotus flowers that rise from the water, suggests secret trysts. But then again, perhaps Teng Chuanyin's poems should be read as a daring attempt to put the assembled gentlemen in their place. They have come together to gape at a girl who composes poems like a man. But if they thought they'll be able to pluck her like a lotus flower, they are in for an unpleasant surprise. Red Brush contains another interesting account on a young woman who claimed that she met with famous scholars from the past through her dreams. You are welcome to explore this story on your own. Here we come to the end of this presentation, which is the last for the week. Since we have covered many different stories, I provided a poll on Canvas for you to vote on the story you found the most interesting. Please fill it out in preparation for class discussion. And of course, please also remember to complete the quiz and the pre-class reflections. I look forward to discussing those stories with you in class.